Such was the reception accorded him that the courtiers of the Shah were moved with envy. "Does not your Imperial Majesty realize," they protested, "that this Haji Syed Javad is none other than the man who, even prior to the declaration of the Sayyid-i Bab, had proclaimed himself a Bábí and had pledged his undying loyalty to his person?" The Shah, perceiving the malice which actuated their accusation, was sorely displeased, and rebuked them for their temerity and low-mindedness. "How strange," he is reported to have exclaimed, "whoever is distinguished by the uprightness of his conduct and the courtesy of his manners, my people forthwith denounce him as a Bábí and regard him as an object worthy of my condemnation." Haji Syed Javad spent the last days of his life in Kerman, and remained until his last hour a staunch supporter of the faith. He never wavered in his convictions, nor relaxed in his unsparing endeavors for the diffusion of the cause. Sheikh Sultan-i Karbilai, whose ancestors ranked among the leading ulamas of Karbala, and who himself had been a firm supporter and intimate companion of Sayyid Qasim, was also among those who, in those days, had met the Bab in Shiraz. It was he who, at a later time, proceeded to Selemani in search of Baha'u'llah, and whose daughter was subsequently given in marriage to Akhe-i Kalim. When he arrived at Shiraz, he was accompanied by Sheikh Hassan-i Zunusi, to whom we have referred in the early pages of this narrative. To him the Bab assigned the task of transcribing, in collaboration with Mullah Abdul Karim, the tablets which he had lately revealed. Sheikh Sultan, who had been too ill at the time of his arrival to meet the Bab, received one night, while still on his sick-bed, a message from his beloved, informing him that at about 2 hours after sunset he would himself visit him. That night the Ethiopian servant, who was acting as lantern-bearer to his master, was instructed to walk in advance at a distance which would keep away the attention of the people from him, and to extinguish the lantern as soon as he had reached his destination. I have heard Sheikh Sultan himself describe that nocturnal visit. The Bab, who had bidden me extinguish the lamp in my room ere he arrived, came straight to my bedside. In the midst of the darkness which enveloped us, I was holding fast to the hem of his garment, and was imploring him, "Fulfill my desire, O beloved of my heart, and allow me to sacrifice myself for thee, for no one else except thee is able to confer upon me this favor." "O Sheikh," the Bab replied, "I too yearn to immolate myself upon the altar of sacrifice. It behoves us both to cling to the garment of the best beloved, and to seek from him the joy and glory of martyrdom in his path. Rest assured I will, in your behalf, supplicate the Almighty to enable you to attain his presence. Remember me on that day, a day such as the world has never seen before." As the hour of parting approached, he placed in my hand a gift which he asked me to expend for myself. I tried to refuse, but he begged me to accept it. Finally, I acceded to his wish, whereupon he arose and departed. The allusion of the Bab that night to his best beloved excited my wonder and curiosity. In the years that followed, I oftentimes believed that the one to whom the Bab had referred was none other than Tahiri. I even imagined Sayyid-i-Ulúv to be that person. I was sorely perplexed and knew not how to unravel this mystery. When I reached Karbala and attained the presence of Baha'u'llah, I became firmly convinced that he alone could claim such affection from the Bab, that he, and only he, could be worthy of such adoration. The second Nowruz after the declaration of the Bab's mission, which fell on the 21st day of the month of Rabiul Awwal in the year AH 1262, AD 1846, found the Bab still in Shiraz, enjoying, under circumstances of comparative tranquillity and ease, the blessings of undisturbed association with his family and kindred. Quietly and unceremoniously he celebrated the festival of Nowruz in his own home, and in accordance with his invariable custom, bountifully conferred upon both his mother and his wife the marks of his affection and favor. By the wisdom of his counsels and the tenderness of his love, he cheered their hearts and dispelled their apprehensions. He bequeathed to them all his possessions, and transferred to their names the title of his property. In a document which he himself wrote and signed, He directed that his house and its furniture, as well as the rest of his estate, should be regarded as the exclusive property of his mother and his wife, and that upon the death of the former, her share of the property should revert to his wife. The mother of the Bab failed at first to recognize the significance of the mission proclaimed by her son. She remained for a time unaware of the magnitude of the forces latent in his revelation. As she approached the end of her life, however, she was able to perceive the inestimable quality of that treasure which she had conceived and given to the world. It was Baha'u'llah who eventually enabled her to discover the value of that hidden treasure, which had lain for so many years concealed from her eyes. She was living in Iraq, where she hoped to spend the remaining days of her life, when Baha'u'llah instructed two of his devoted followers, Haji Syed Javad-e Karbilai and the wife of Haji Abdul Majid-e Shirazi, both of whom were already intimately acquainted with her, to instruct her in the principles of the faith. She acknowledged the truth of the cause and remained until the closing years of the 13th century A.H., that is, the 13th century A.H. ended in October A.D. 1882, when she departed this life, fully aware of the bountiful gifts which the Almighty had chosen to confer upon her. The wife of the Bab, unlike his mother, perceived at the earliest dawn of his revelation the glory and uniqueness of his mission, and felt from the beginning the intensity of its force. No one except Tahiri, among the women of her generation, surpassed her in the spontaneous character of her devotion, nor excelled the fervor of her faith. To her the Bab confided the secret of his future sufferings, and unfolded to her eyes the significance of the events that were to transpire in his day. He bade her not to divulge this secret to his mother, and counselled her to be patient and resigned to the will of God. He entrusted her with a special prayer, revealed and written by himself, the reading of which, he assured her, would remove her difficulties and lighten the burden of her woes. In the hour of your perplexity, he directed her, recite this prayer ere you go to sleep. I myself will appear to you, and will banish your anxiety. Faithful to his advice, every time she turned to him in prayer, the light of his unfailing guidance illumined her path and resolved her problems. After the Bab had settled the affairs of his household and provided for the future maintenance of both his mother and his wife, he transferred his residence from his own home to that of Haji Mirza Syed Ali. There he awaited the approaching hour of his sufferings. He knew that the afflictions which were in store for him could no longer be delayed, and that he was soon to be caught in a whirlpool of adversity which would carry him swiftly to the field of martyrdom, the crowning object of his life. He bade those of his disciples who had settled in Shiraz, among whom were Mullah Abdul Karim and Sheikh Hassan Izunuzi, to proceed to Isfahan and there await his further instructions. Syed Hussein-i Yazdi, one of the Letters of the Living, who had recently arrived at Shiraz, was likewise instructed to proceed to Isfahan and join the company of his fellow disciples in that city. Meanwhile, Hussein Khan, the governor of Fars, was bending every effort to involve the Bab in fresh embarrassments and to degrade him still further in the eyes of the public. The smouldering fire of his hostility was fanned to flame by the knowledge that the Bab was allowed to pursue unmolested the course of his activities, that he was still able to associate with certain of his companions, and that he continued to enjoy the benefits of unrestrained fellowship with his family and kindred. By the aid of his secret agents, he succeeded in obtaining accurate information regarding the character and influence of the movement which the Bab had initiated. He had secretly watched his movements, ascertained the degree of enthusiasm which he had aroused, and scrutinized the motives, the conduct, and the number of those who had embraced his cause. One night there came to Hussein Khan, the chief of his emissaries, with a report that the number of those who were crowding to see the Bab had assumed such proportions as to necessitate immediate action on the part of those whose function it was to guard the security of that city. "The eager crowd that gathers every night to visit the Bab," he remarked, surpasses in number the multitude of people that throngs every day before the gates of the seat of your government. Among them are to be seen men celebrated alike for their exalted rank and intensive learning. Such are the tact and lavish generosity which his maternal uncle displays in his attitude towards the officials of your government, that no one among your subordinates is inclined to acquaint you with the reality of the situation. If you would permit me, I will, with the aid of a number of your attendants, surprise the Bab at the hour of midnight, and will deliver, handcuffed, into your hands certain of his associates who will enlighten you concerning his activities, and who will confirm the truth of my statements." Hussein Khan refused to comply with his wish. "I can tell better than you," was his answer, "what the interests of the state require. Watch me from a distance. I shall know how to deal with him." That very moment, the governor summoned Abdul Hamid Khan, the chief constable of the city. "Proceed immediately," he commanded him, "to the house of Haji Mirza Syed Ali. Quietly and unobserved, scale the wall and ascend to the roof, and from there suddenly enter his home. Arrest the Syed Bab immediately, and conduct him to this place together with any of the visitors who may be present with him at that time. Confiscate whatever books and documents you are able to find in that house. As to Haji Mirza Syed Ali, it is my intention to impose upon him the following day the penalty for having failed to redeem his promise. I swear by the imperial diadem of Muhammad Shah that this very night I shall have the Syed Bab executed together with his wretched companions. Their ignominious death will quench the flame they have kindled, and will awaken every would-be follower of that creed to the danger that awaits every disturber of the peace in this realm. By this act I shall have extirpated a heresy, the continuance of which constitutes the gravest menace to the interest of the state." Abdul Hamid Khan retired to execute his task. He, together with his assistants, broke into the house of Haji Mirza Syed Ali on the 23rd of September, AD 1845, and found the Bab in the company of his maternal uncle and a certain Syed Qasim-i Zanjani, who was later martyred in Mazindaran, and whose brother, Syed Murtaza, was one of the 7 martyrs of Tehran. He immediately arrested them, collected whatever documents he could find, ordered Haji Mirza Syed Ali to remain in his house, and conducted the rest to the seat of government. The Bab, undaunted and self-possessed, was heard to repeat this verse of the Koran: "That with which they are threatened is for the morning. Is not the morning near?" No sooner had the chief constable reached the marketplace than he discovered, to his amazement, that the people of the city were fleeing from every side in consternation, as if overtaken by an appalling calamity. He was struck with horror when he witnessed the long train of coffins being hurriedly transported through the streets, each followed by a procession of men and women loudly uttering shrieks of agony and pain. This sudden tumult, the lamentations, the affrighted countenances, the imprecations of the multitude distressed and bewildered him. He inquired as to the reason. This very night, he was told, a plague of exceptional virulence has broken out. It was, in fact, the outbreak of cholera. We are smitten by this devastating power. Already since the hour of midnight it has extinguished the lives of over 100 people. Alarm and despair reign in every house. The people are abandoning their homes, and in their plight are invoking the aid of the Almighty. A footnote says, the Bab refers to this incident in the Dalail-i-Sabi in the following terms: "Recall the first days of the manifestation, how many people died of cholera. That was one of the wonders of the manifestation, yet no one understood it. During 4 years the scourge raged among the Mohammedan Shiites without anyone grasping its true significance." From the Book of 7 Proofs, translated by A.L.M. Nicholas, pages 61 to 62. Abdul Hamid Khan, terrified by this dreadful intelligence, ran to the home of Hussein Khan. An old man who guarded his house and was acting as doorkeeper informed him that the house of his master was deserted, that the ravages of the pestilence had devastated his home and afflicted the members of his household. 2 of his Ethiopian maids, he was told, and a manservant have already fallen victims to this scourge, and members of his own family are now dangerously ill. In his despair my master has abandoned his home and, leaving the dead unburied, has fled with the rest of his family to the Bahá'í Bábí. Footnote says, a garden in the outskirts of Shiraz. Abdul Hamid Khan decided to conduct the Bab to his own home and keep him in his custody pending instructions from the governor. As he was approaching his house, he was struck by the sound of weeping and wailing of the members of his household. His son had been attacked by the plague and was hovering on the brink of death. In his despair he threw himself at the feet of the Bab and tearfully implored him to save the life of his son. He begged him to forgive his past transgressions and misdeeds. "I adjure you," he entreated the Bab as he clung to the hem of his garment, "by him who has elevated you to this exalted position, to intercede in my behalf and to offer a prayer for the recovery of my son. Suffer not that he in the prime of his youth be taken away from me. Punish him not for the guilt which his father has committed. I repent of what I have done, and at this moment resign my post. I solemnly pledge my word that never again will I accept such a position, even though I perish of hunger." The Bab, who was in the act of performing his ablutions and was preparing to offer the prayer of dawn, directed him to take some of the water with which he was washing his face to his son and request him to drink it. This, he said, would save his life. No sooner had Abdul Hamid Khan witnessed the signs of the recovery of his son than he wrote a letter to the governor, in which he acquainted him with the whole situation and begged him to cease his attacks on the Bab. "Have pity on yourself," he wrote to him, "as well as on those whom Providence has committed to your care. Should the fury of this plague continue its fatal course, no one in this city, I fear, will by the end of this day have survived the horror of its attack." Hussein Khan replied that the Bab should be immediately released and given freedom to go wherever he might please. As soon as an account of these happenings reached Tehran and was brought to the attention of the Shah, an imperial edict dismissing Hussein Khan from office was issued and sent to Shiraz. From the day of his dismissal, that shameless tyrant fell a victim to countless misfortunes, and was in the end unable to earn even his daily bread. No one seemed willing or able to save him from his evil plight. When, at a later time, Baha'u'llah had been banished to Baghdad, Hussein Khan sent him a letter, in which he expressed repentance and promised to atone for his past misdeeds, on condition that he should regain his former position. Baha'u'llah refused to answer him. Sunk in misery and shame, he languished until his death. The Bab, who was staying at the home of Abdul Hamid Khan, sent Syed Kazim to request Haji Mirza Syed Ali to come and see him. He informed his uncle of his intended departure from Shiraz, entrusted both his mother and his wife to his care, and charged him to convey to each the expression of his affection and the assurance of God's unfailing assistance. "Wherever they may be," he told his uncle as he bade him farewell, "God's all-encompassing love and protection will surround them. I will again meet you amid the mountains of Azerbaijan, from whence I will send you forth to obtain the crown of martyrdom. I myself will follow you, together with one of my loyal disciples, and will join you in the realm of eternity." Chapter 10. The Bab's sojourn in Isfahan. The summer of the year AH 1262, AD 1846, was drawing to a close, when the Bab bade his last farewell to his native city of Shiraz, and proceeded to Isfahan. Syed Kazim-i Zanjani accompanied him on that journey. As he approached the outskirts of the city, he wrote a letter to the governor of the province, Manushir Khan, the Mutamidud Dawle, in which he requested him to signify his wish as to the place where he could dwell. The letter, which he entrusted to Syed Kazim, was expressive of such courtesy and revealed such exquisite penmanship that the Mutamid was moved to instruct the Sultanul Ulama, the Imam Jumi of Isfahan, the foremost ecclesiastical authority of that province, to receive the Bab in his own home, and to accord him a kindly and generous reception. In addition to his message, the governor sent the Imam Jumi the letter he had received from the Bab. The Sultanul Ulama accordingly bade his own brother, whose savage cruelty in later years earned him the appellation of Raksha from Baha'u'llah. Footnote says Raksha means female serpent. To proceed with a number of his favorite companions to meet and escort the expected visitor to the gate of the city. As the Bab approached, the Imam Jumi went out to welcome him in person, and conducted him ceremoniously to his house. Such were the honours accorded to the Bab in those days that when, on a certain Friday, he was returning from the public bath to the house, a multitude of people were seen eagerly clamouring for the water which he had used for his ablutions. His fervent admirers firmly believed in his unfailing virtue and power to heal their sicknesses and ailments. The Imam Jumi himself had, from the very first night, become so enamoured with him who was the object of such devotion that, assuming the functions of an attendant, he undertook to minister to the needs and wants of his beloved guest. Seizing the ewer from the hand of the chief steward, and utterly ignoring the customary dignity of his rank, he proceeded to pour out the water over the hands of the Bab. One night after supper, the Imam Jumi, whose curiosity had been excited by the extraordinary traits of character which his youthful guest had revealed, ventured to request him to reveal a commentary on the Surah of Val Asr, which is the Quran 103. His request was readily granted. Calling for pen and paper, the Bab, with astonishing rapidity and without the least premeditation, began to reveal, in the presence of his host, a most illuminating interpretation of the aforementioned surah. It was nearing midnight when the Bab found himself engaged in the exposition of the manifold implications involved in the first letter of that surah. That letter, the letter Vav, upon which Sheikh Ahmadi Asai had already laid such emphasis in his writings, symbolized for the Bab the advent of a new cycle of divine revelation, and has since been alluded to by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Aqdas in such passages as the mystery of the great reversal and the sign of the sovereign. The Bab soon after began to chant, in the presence of his host and his companions, the homily with which he had prefaced his commentary on the surah. Those words of power confounded his hearers with wonder. They seemed as if bewitched by the magic of his voice. Instinctively they started to their feet, and together with the Imam Jumi reverently kissed the hem of his garment. Mullah Muhammad Taqi-i Harati, an eminent mujtahid, broke out into a sudden expression of exultation and praise. "Peerless and unique," he exclaimed, "as are the words which have streamed from this pen, to be able to reveal within so short a time, and in so legible a writing, so great a number of verses as to equal a fourth, nay, a third of the Koran, is in itself an achievement such as no mortal, without the intervention of God, could hope to perform. Neither the cleaving of the moon nor the quickening of the pebbles of the sea can compare with so mighty an act." As the Bab's fame was being gradually diffused over the entire city of Isfahan, an unceasing stream of visitors flowed from every quarter to the house of the Imam Jumi. A few to satisfy their curiosity, others to obtain a deeper understanding of the fundamental verities of his faith, and still others to seek the remedy for their ills and sufferings. The Mu'tamid himself came one day to visit the Bab, and while seated in the midst of an assemblage of the most brilliant and accomplished divines of Isfahan, requested him to expound the nature and demonstrate the validity of the Nubuwat-i-Khasi, which is Muhammad's specific mission. He had previously, in that same gathering, called upon those who were present to adduce such proofs and evidences in support of this fundamental article of their faith as would constitute an unanswerable testimony for those who were inclined to repudiate its truth. No one, however, seemed capable of responding to his invitation. "Which do you prefer?" asked the Bab, "a verbal or a written answer to your question?" "A written reply," he answered, "not only would please those who are present at this meeting, but would edify and instruct both the present and the future generations." The Bab instantly took up his pen and began to write. In less than 2 hours he had filled about 50 pages with a most refreshing and circumstantial inquiry into the origin, the character, and the pervasive influence of Islam. The originality of his dissertation, the vigor and vividness of the style, the accuracy of its minutest details, invested his treatment of that noble theme with an excellence which no one among those who were present on that occasion could have failed to perceive. With masterly insight, he linked the central idea in the concluding passage of this exposition with the advent of the promised Qaim and the expected return of the Imam Hussein. A footnote says reference to his own mission and to Baha'u'llah's subsequent revelation. He argued with such force and courage that those who heard him recite its verses were astounded by the magnitude of his revelation. No one dared to insinuate the slightest objection, much less openly to challenge his statements. The Mu'tamid could not help giving vent to his enthusiasm and joy. "Hear me!" he exclaimed. "Members of this revered assembly, I take you as my witnesses. Never until this day have I in my heart been firmly convinced of the truth of Islam. I can henceforth, thanks to this exposition penned by this youth, declare myself a firm believer in the faith proclaimed by the Apostle of God. I solemnly testify to my belief in the reality of the superhuman power with which this youth is endowed, a power which no amount of learning can ever impart." With these words, he brought the meeting to an end. The growing popularity of the Bab aroused the resentment of the ecclesiastical authorities of Isfahan, who viewed with concern and envy the ascendancy which an unlearned youth was slowly acquiring over the thoughts and consciences of their followers. They firmly believed that unless they rose to stem the tide of popular enthusiasm, the very foundations of their existence would be undermined. A few of the more sagacious among them thought it wise to abstain from acts of direct hostility to either the person or the teachings of the Bab, as such action, they felt, would serve only to enhance his prestige and consolidate his position. The mischief-makers, however, were busily engaged in disseminating the wildest reports concerning the character and claims of the Bab. These reports soon reached Tehran and were brought to the attention of Haji Mirza Akazi, the Grand Vizier of Muhammad Shah. This haughty and overbearing minister viewed with apprehension the possibility that his sovereign might one day feel inclined to befriend the Bab, an inclination which he felt sure would precipitate his own downfall. The Haji was, moreover, apprehensive lest the Mu'tamid, who enjoyed the confidence of the Shah, should succeed in arranging an interview between the sovereign and the Bab. He was well aware that should such an interview take place, the impressionable and tender-hearted Muhammad Shah would be completely won over by the attractiveness and novelty of that creed. Spurred on by such reflections, he addressed a strongly worded communication to the Imam Jumi, in which he upbraided him for his grave neglect of the obligation imposed upon him to safeguard the interests of Islam. "We had expected you," Haji Mirza Akazi wrote him, "to resist with all your power every cause which conflicts with the best interests of the government and the people of this land. You seem instead to have befriended, nay, to have glorified, the author of this obscure and contemptible movement." He likewise wrote a number of encouraging letters to the ulamas of Isfahan, whom he had previously ignored, but upon whom he now lavished his special favors. The Imam Jumi, while refusing to alter his respectful attitude towards his guest, was induced by the tone of the message he had received from the Grand Vizier to instruct his associates to devise such means as would tend to lessen their ever-increasing number of visitors who thronged each day to the presence of the Bab. Muhammad Misi, surnamed the Safihul Ulama, son of the late Haji Kalbasi, in his desire to gratify the wish and to earn the esteem of Haji Mirza Akazi, began to calumniate the Bab from the pulpit in the most unseemly language. As soon as the Mu'tamid was informed of these developments, he sent a message to the Imam Jumi in which he reminded him of the visit he as governor had paid to the Bab, and extended to him, as well as to his guest, an invitation to his home. The Mu'tamid invited Haji Syed Asadullah, son of the late Haji Syed Muhammad Baqir-i Rashti, Haji Muhammad Jafar-i Abadi, Muhammad Mihdi, Mirza Hassan-i Nuri, and a few others to be present at the meeting. Haji Syed Asadullah refused the invitation and endeavored to dissuade those who had been invited from participating in that gathering. "I have sought to excuse myself," he informed them, "and I would most certainly urge you to do the same. I regard it as most unwise of you to meet the Sayyidi Bab face to face. He will, no doubt, reassert his claim, and will, in support of his argument, adduce whatever proof you may desire him to give, and without the least hesitation will reveal as a testimony to the truth he bears verses of such number as would equal half the Koran. In the end he will challenge you in these words, "Produce likewise, if ye be men of truth." We can in no wise successfully resist him. If we disdain to answer him, our impotence will have been exposed. If we, on the other hand, submit to his claim, we shall not only be forfeiting our own reputation, our own prerogatives and rights, but will have committed ourselves to acknowledge any further claims that he may feel inclined to make in the future. Haji Muhammad Jafar heeded this counsel and refused to accept the invitation of the governor. Muhammad Mihdi, Mirza Hassan-i Nuri, and a few others who disdained such advice presented themselves at the appointed hour at the home of the Mu'tamid. At the invitation of the host, Mirza Hassan, a noted Platonist, requested the Bab to elucidate certain abstruse philosophical doctrines connected with the Arshi of Mulla Sadra, the meaning of which only a few had been able to unravel. In simple and unconventional language, the Bab replied to each of his questions. Mirza Hassan, though unable to apprehend the meaning of the answers which he had received, realized how inferior was the learning of the so-called exponents of the Platonic and the Aristotelian schools of thought of his day to the knowledge displayed by that youth. Muhammad Mihdi ventured in his turn to question the Bab regarding certain aspects of the Islamic law. Dissatisfied with the explanation he received, he began to contend idly with the Bab. He was soon silenced by the Mu'tamid, who, cutting short his conversation, turned to an attendant and, bidding him to light the lantern, gave the order that Muhammad Mihdi be immediately conducted to his home. The Mu'tamid subsequently confided his apprehensions to the Imam Jumi. "I fear the machinations of the enemies of the Sayyid-i Bab," he told him. "The Shah has summoned him to Tehran. I am commanded to arrange for his departure. I deem it more advisable for him to stay in my home until such time as he can leave this city." The Imam Jumi acceded to his request and returned alone to his house. The Bab had tarried 40 days at the residence of the Imam Jumi. While he was still there, a certain Mullah Muhammad Taqi-i Harati, who was privileged to meet the Bab every day, undertook, with his consent, to translate one of his works, entitled Rizali-i Furu-i Adliye, from the original Arabic into Persian. The service he thereby rendered to the Persian believers was marred, however, by his subsequent behavior. Fear suddenly seized him, and he was induced eventually to sever his connection with his fellow believers. Ere the Bab had transferred his residence to the house of the Mu'tamid, Mirza Ibrahim, father of the Sultanush Shuhada and elder brother of Mirza Muhammad Ali Inari, to whom we have already referred, invited the Bab to his home one night. Mirza Ibrahim was a friend of the Imam Jumi, was intimately associated with him, and controlled the management of all his affairs. The banquet which was spread for the Bab that night was one of unsurpassed magnificence. It was commonly observed that neither the officials nor the notables of the city had offered a feast of such magnitude and splendor. The Sultanush Shuhada and his brother, the Mahbubush Shuhada, were lads of 9 and 11 respectively, served at the banquet and received special attention from the Bab. That night, during dinner, Mirza Ibrahim turned to his guest and said, "My brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali, has no child. I beg you to intercede in his behalf and to grant his heart's desire." The Bab took a portion of the food with which he had been served, placed it with his own hands on a platter, and handed it to his host, asking him to take it to Mirza Muhammad Ali and his wife. "Let them both partake of this," he said. "Their wish will be fulfilled." By virtue of that portion which the Bab had chosen to bestow upon her, the wife of Mirza Muhammad Ali conceived and in due time gave birth to a girl, who eventually was joined in wedlock with the Most Great Branch. This is a reference to Munir-i Khanum's marriage with Abdul-Baha, a union that came to be regarded as a consummation of the hopes entertained by her parents. The high honors accorded to the Bab served further to inflame the hostility of the ulamas. With feelings of dismay they beheld on every side evidences of his all-pervasive influence invading the stronghold of orthodoxy and subverting their foundations. They summoned a gathering at which they issued a written document, signed and sealed by all the ecclesiastical leaders of the city, condemning the Bab to death. They all concurred in this condemnation, with the exception of Haji Syed Asadullah and Haji Muhammad Jafar-i Abadi, both of whom refused to associate themselves with the contents of so glaringly abusive a document. The Imam Jumi, though declining to endorse the death warrant of the Bab, was induced by reason of his extreme cowardice and ambition to add to that document in his own handwriting the following testimony. I testify that in the course of my association with this youth, I have been unable to discover any act that would in any way betray his repudiation of the doctrines of Islam. On the contrary, I have known him as a pious and loyal observer of its precepts. The extravagance of his claims, however, and his disdainful contempt for the things of the world incline me to believe that he is devoid of reason and judgment. No sooner had the Mu'tamid been informed of the condemnation pronounced by the ulamas of Isfahan that he determined, by a plan which he himself conceived, to nullify the effects of that cruel verdict. He issued immediate instructions that towards the hour of sunset the Bab, escorted by 500 horsemen of the governor's own mounted bodyguard, should leave the gate of the city and proceed in the direction of Tehran. Imperative orders had been given that at the completion of each farsang 100 of this mounted escort should return directly to Isfahan. To the chief of the last remaining contingent, a man in whom he placed implicit confidence, the Mu'tamid confidentially intimated his desire that at every Maidan 20 of the remaining 100 should likewise be ordered by him to return to the city. Of the 20 remaining horsemen, the Mu'tamid directed that 10 should be dispatched to Ardistan for the purpose of collecting the taxes levied by the government, and that the rest, all of whom should be of his tried and most reliable men, should, by an unfrequented route, bring the Bab back in disguise to Isfahan. They were, moreover, instructed so to regulate their march that before dawn of the ensuing day the Bab should have arrived at Isfahan and should have been delivered into his custody. This plan was immediately taken in hand and duly executed. At an unsuspected hour, the Bab re-entered the city, was directly conducted to the private residence of the Mu'tamid, known by the name of Imarat-i-Khurshid, and was introduced through a side entrance reserved for the Mu'tamid himself into his private apartments. The governor waited in person on the Bab, served his meals, and provided whatever was required for his comfort and safety. A footnote says, "Thus this room in which I find myself, which has neither doors nor definite limits, is today the highest of the dwellings of paradise, for the tree of truth lives therein. It would seem that all the atoms of the room sing in one voice, 'In truth I am God. There is no other God beside me, the Lord of all things.' And they sing above all the rooms of the earth, even above those adorned with mirrors of gold. If, however, the tree of truth abides in one of these ornamented rooms, then the atoms of their mirrors sing that song as did and do the atoms of the mirrors of the palace Sadri, for in the days of Sa'd, Isfahan, he abode therein." From the Persian Bayan, Volume 1, page 128. Meanwhile, the wildest conjectures obtained currency in the city regarding the journey of the Bab to Tehran, the sufferings which he was made to endure on his way to the capital, the verdict which had been pronounced against him, and the penalty which he had suffered. These rumors greatly distressed the believers who were residing in Isfahan. The Mu'tamid, who was well aware of their grief and anxiety, interceded with the Bab in their behalf, and begged to be allowed to introduce them to his presence. The Bab addressed a few words in his own handwriting to Mullah Abdul Karim-i Qazvini, who had taken up his quarters in the Madrisi of Nim Avad, and instructed the Mu'tamid to send it to him by a trusted messenger. An hour later, Mullah Abdul Karim was ushered into the presence of the Bab. Of his arrival no one except the Mu'tamid was informed. He received from his master some of his writings, and was instructed to transcribe them in collaboration with Sayyid Hussein-i-Yazdi and Sheikh Hassan-i Zanussi. To these he soon returned, bearing the welcome news of the Bab's well-being and safety. Of all the believers residing in Isfahan, these 3 alone were allowed to see him. One day, while seated with the Bab in his private garden within the courtyard of his house, the Mu'tamid, taking his guest into his confidence, addressed him in these words: "The Almighty Giver has endowed me with great riches. I know not how best to use them. Now that I have, by the aid of God, been led to recognize this revelation, it is my ardent desire to consecrate all my possessions to the furtherance of its interests and the spread of its fame. It is my intention to proceed, by your leave, to Tehran, and to do my best to win to this cause Muhammad Shah, whose confidence in me is firm and unshaken. I am certain that he will eagerly embrace it, and will arise to promote it far and wide. I will also endeavor to induce the Shah to dismiss the profligate Haji Mirza Qazi, the folly of whose administration has well nigh brought this land to the verge of ruin. Next, I will strive to obtain for you the hand of one of the sisters of the Shah, and will myself undertake the preparation of your nuptials. Finally, I hope to be able to incline the hearts of the rulers and kings of the earth to this most wondrous cause, and to extirpate every lingering trace of that corrupt ecclesiastical hierarchy that has stained the fair name of Islam." "May God requite you for your noble intentions," the Bab replied. "So lofty a purpose is to me even more precious than the act itself. Your days and mine are numbered, however. They are too short to enable me to witness and allow you to achieve the realization of your hopes. Not by the means which you fondly imagine will an almighty providence accomplish the triumph of his faith. Through the poor and lowly of this land, by the blood which these shall have shed in his path, will the omnipotent sovereign ensure the preservation and consolidate the foundation of his cause. That same God will, in the world to come, place upon your head the crown of immortal glory, and will shower upon you his inestimable blessings. Of the span of your earthly life there remain only 3 months and 9 days, after which you shall, with faith and certitude, hasten to your eternal abode." The Mu'tamid greatly rejoiced at these words. Resigned to the will of God, he prepared himself for the departure which the words of the Bab had so clearly foreshadowed. He wrote his testament, settled his private affairs, and bequeathed whatever he possessed to the Bab. Immediately after his death, however, his nephew, the rapacious Gurgin Khan, discovered and destroyed his will, seized his property, and contemptuously ignored his wishes. As the days of his earthly life were drawing to a close, the Mu'tamid increasingly sought the presence of the Bab, and, in his hours of intimate fellowship with him, obtained a deeper realization of the spirit which animated his faith. "As the hour of my departure approaches," he one day told the Bab, "I feel an undefinable joy pervading my soul, but I am apprehensive for you. I tremble at the thought of being compelled to leave you to the mercy of so ruthless a successor as Gurgin Khan. He will no doubt discover your presence in this home, and will, I fear, grievously ill-treat you." "Fear not," remonstrated the Bab. "I have committed myself into the hands of God. My trust is in him. Such is the power which he has bestowed upon me, that if it be my wish, I can convert these very stones into gems of inestimable value, and can instill into the heart of the most wicked criminal the loftiest conceptions of uprightness and duty. Of my own will have I chosen to be afflicted by my enemies, that God might accomplish the things destined to be done." That last is a quotation from the Quran, 8:42. As those precious hours flew by, a sense of overpowering devotion, of increased consciousness of nearness to God, filled the heart of the Mu'tamid. In his eyes, the world's pomp and pageantry melted away into insignificance when brought face to face with the eternal realities enshrined in the revelation of the Bab. His vision of its glories, its infinite potentialities, its incalculable blessings, grew in vividness as he increasingly realized the vanity of earthly ambition and the limitations of human endeavor. He continued to ponder these thoughts in his heart until the time when a slight attack of fever, which lasted but one night, terminated his life. Serene and confident, he winged his flight to the great beyond. He died, according to E.G. Brown, from a traveller's narrative, note L, page 277, February-March, A.D. 1847.